John 11 is a perfect example of what we mean by liminal space. There's a spiritual, physical, and emotional threshold crossing all over the place. Lazarus gets sick and dies. 4 days later, Jesus pulls him up from the grave. That's liminal space. The disciples are scared to go to Lazarus' house for fear of being stoned. That's liminal space. Mary's beside herself and can't pull herself to leave the house. That's liminal space. Martha's enraged as she mourns her brother's death and she stands on the edge of town waiting for Jesus. That's liminal space. Everyone is dealing with something in their own way, which is important to note. Not all liminal spaces are the same. You might be in one right now, but others in your house aren't or are in a different one. That's just how this works. I mean, look at Mary and Martha. They're in the same house, have the same brother, and are grieving the same circumstances surrounding his death. But they respond differently because their souls need different things. And that's true for us too. Our lives are our own, and we're processing grief in the way that makes sense to us. And that's why it's so important to have compassion for people going through something. And Plato once said, "Be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." This really applies to how we Christians should act in the world. We have to have empathy and compassion for others. Otherwise, we don't understand the battle they're fighting. I appreciate that Martha lets Mary stay in the house and she doesn't force her to follow her to the edge of town. And Mary doesn't make Martha stay at home either. She recognizes Martha's need to take action. Her soul needs to protest. So she does. And I think about this scene in light of all the protesting happening nationwide today. People are going through something hard, and they need to take action in some way. Their soul needs it. My family and I attended a Black Lives Matter protest here in Waynesboro on Monday. It was sponsored and put on by students at Waynesboro High. Hundreds of people came out. It was wonderfully peaceful and wonderfully safe. My 3-year-old daughter wanted to chant, but was afraid that no one would be able to hear her small voice. So she made a sign instead that read, "I love you." There's something in that for all of us to hear. My colleague and friend who pastors Christ Tabernacle preached. He was compassionate. It was an altogether lovely, peaceful protest. The students did something good. They're like Martha. They needed to go to the edge of town and prepare to make a statement. They wanted their voices to be heard. And it was a voice of solidarity, inclusivity, and love. It felt like they were heavily influenced by the church. But I also know, because I read it on social media, that there are people who don't understand why we protest. What good does it do? Those people are like Mary. Their souls need to stay inside right now. The Dalai Lama came out this week and made a statement regarding the protests. He said this is what the world really needs to do, is to turn off the news. Find peace deep within and learn to see that our daily rhythms can lead us to joy. We need to find joy. The Dalai Lama is like Mary. He's trying to find the calm within the storm, and he needs solitude to do it. This week, I also picked up a book by Elie Wiesel. Years after surviving the Holocaust, he penned these words: "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere." He's like Martha. He needs to stand on the town's edge, pointing a light into the dark. He needs his voice heard. If he doesn't, who will? And if he doesn't do it now, then when? So which one is right? The Dalai Lama or Elie Wiesel? Here's a glimpse into the real complicated truth of life. Both of these responses are right. Both are okay. Both are needed. Both are good. What's not good, though, is when we choose our path, but we can't look with compassion at the other who chose a different one. Mary and Martha let each other do their own thing. They didn't belittle or bemoan each other. They listened to what their own souls needed and made space for the other to do the same. We should do the same, especially Christians. Those of us who pledge to imitate the life of Christ should be the first to do the hard inner work to figure out what it is our soul needs. And then we must develop the capacity for compassion for those who respond differently. Now, I'm not suggesting that we condone illegal activity. Looting, rioting, I get it. It is troubling. But so is the scene of the man who drove his car into protesters in Richmond. Those who feel unheard, they act out. That's why we as Christians must take a chapter from Mary and Martha and learn to see the other with compassion. The truth is, there may be people like Martha to our Mary, and there's nothing wrong with that. There may be people like Mary to our Martha, and there's nothing wrong with that either. We are all in this grief together. The racial unrest, the oppression, we're all in this life together. But that doesn't mean we all respond and need to respond in the same way. Liminal space reminds us that there's no one perfect solution. Life's not simplistic. It's complicated on multiple fronts, multiple vantage points, multiple options with multiple ramifications for multiple decisions. There's no one right choice, and that's okay. But a choice does have to be made. We can't stay in liminality. Even though we don't have clear boundaries or understandings, we still have to choose. My hope is you choose to step forward in faith, not back in fear. God's good future is forward. Even when it's painful and you can't see it fully from all the confusion and darkness, it's definitely not backwards. Life can't go backwards. We can't become more unconscious and see that as progress. Not listening to the cries of those who are struggling can't be our best option. Not giving voice to the voiceless can't be what our churches are preaching. Not creating a sustainable life for all people can't be what tomorrow holds. The church must be a catalyst, a safe space. It must help people recognize their liminality and then provide opportunities to step forward beyond sin, beyond despair, beyond darkness and apathy and pride and arrogance. The church must help people develop compassion for both self and one another. And Jesus in John 11 shows us exactly how to do this. Watch this interaction with Martha. This is amazing. Starting in verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." In anguish, Martha cries, "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." This is the voice of pain. "Lord, I sent word. You could have made it. Lazarus lasted for 4 days. You could have been here, but you weren't, and my brother died." Anyone who has lost a family member, a friend, a colleague unfairly to racial injustices gets this phrase from Martha. "Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died." This is the cry of protest. And look what Jesus does. He takes it. He listens. He lets her anger speak. He doesn't shut her down. He doesn't overshadow. He doesn't belittle her feelings. He doesn't make himself the victim. He just doesn't talk at all. He lets her protest. He makes room for her anger. And it's the only moment we get in the Gospels. He actually weeps. He takes Martha's righteous anger. He holds it. He hears it. He meets her in the midst of it. He weeps with her. This is compassion. And he does the same for us today. There's so much engagement here with Martha. It's actually easy to miss that also in the story, Jesus then meets with Mary. Both Martha and Mary have their moments with Jesus, and they actually both say the same sentence to him, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. This just shows me that Mary and Martha's grief, it isn't that different. It stirs from the same place in the soul. It just manifests differently. And thankfully, Jesus bears the capacity and the compassion to meet them both in their pain. There's a great deal of theology that's bound up in pain. Barbara Holmes is a Black womanist theologian that speaks and writes about the theology of pain. She says that we must admit and own it, enter into our sorrow, and when we do, we find God. God meets us in our pain. God shows up in our protest and in our solitude. Our pain, when it manifests, can lead us to God. And this may be the most important aspect of liminal space. We have to turn and recognize our own pain and name it. Take our frustrations and sadness and anger and share it with God. If you're in a liminal space and you're too scared to step forward in faith, take that fear, take that anger and share it with God. Don't retreat back. Don't cover it up. Offer it to God. By doing so, we're letting go of that which holds us back. And we're looking forward and believing by giving our anger to God, something good can come of this. That's the whole notion of lament, that we offer our sadness to God. And that's what Martha's doing when she protests. Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And that's what our Black sisters and brothers are saying too. Lord, if you would have been here, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and Philando Castile and Michael Brown and Manuel Elise and Eric Garner and Sandra Bland and George Floyd would not have died. These cries for Black lives, they matter. They're like Martha, which I totally get and I have deep compassion for, and I completely agree. Black lives very much matter. That doesn't mean all lives don't. No one is saying that. Martha's not making a statement that the other people who died on that day should have meant less to Jesus. No, her cry is out of anger and grief. She meets Jesus at the edge of town and just simply said, if you could have been here, Lazarus would not have died. She's processing her pain. And because she does it, how she does it, she actually moves forward from her pain. If we look at verses 21 and 22, when I read them, I imagine a long pause between them. Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Then a long pause. She goes inward into her soul. She's fuming. She can't focus on her thoughts or even her eyes. And then in anger, she takes a deep breath, looks up at Jesus, and notices he's not mad. He's weeping. He's giving her space to grieve. And after a long enough pause, Martha comes to verse 22 on her own. But even now I know God will give you whatever you ask of him. And then Jesus said to her, your brother will rise. And Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. And Jesus said, no, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe. Her anger actually helps move her to acceptance. There is so much gospel bound up in this moment. This is the message people need to hear across the world. It's what Elie Wiesel was saying. It's what the Dalai Lama is saying. It's what Martha is hoping for. It's what Black Lives Matter protests are crying for. And it's what Jesus says to us all. George Floyd will rise. Breonna Taylor will rise. Those who believe in me, though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. So let me say this to everyone filled with the sting of death caused by heartache of racial injustice. This is my pastoral response to your pain. Be like Martha if you need to. We, the church, we will be like Jesus and give you space to be angry. We will weep with you. We'll share your concern. We'll stand with you on the edge of town. We will march with you, and in compassion, we will love you through this. God doesn't want you to stay angry, but take all the time you need. We are deeply sorry for your loss. And to everyone filled with the sting of death caused by heartache of racial injustice who needs to respond like Mary, my pastoral response to you is, do it. Take all the time you need. We, the church, will be like Jesus and give you space to do so. You can even come to our sanctuary to find solitude. We will weep with you. We will share in your concern. We will sit with you. And in compassion, we will love you through this. What is evident to me is that we are all in this shared liminal space together. But our responses are different. If we'll let him, Jesus will meet us where we are and move us forward. We can't and aren't meant to stay here in this pain, and we need to find God in it to move forward. So what will the church choose? A path like Martha? Great. A path like Mary? Fine. Both are good, and both lead us forward to God. What we, the church, absolutely can't choose, nor Christians individually, is to do nothing and show no compassion. We can't go backwards. That's not a good option. We have to be like Jesus, who shows up and sits in Mary and Martha's grief. We have to show up and weep. We have to show up and listen. It's the only way that we move forward together.